Very exciting times for chess as a new top tournament has just started today. And as you can see at the starting position, it's not just a normal game. We are going to see a game from the very first Freestyle Chess GOAT Challenge, which is an initiative of German entrepreneur Jan-Henrik Büttner. And he contacted Magnus Carlsen last year during the Qatar Masters. And Magnus said, well, I would like to play in your tournament, but let's do something different. I don't want to play just classical chess with a classical time control. No, let's try to play Fischer Random or Chess 960, however you would like to call it. Now they call it the Freestyle Chess GOAT Challenge. And it works as follows. We're starting with 2 days of rapid games and 8 players. They're playing an all play all. And the rapid section, it determines who is going to play whom in the knockout portion, which is played with the classical time control. I hope you can still follow it. Anyway, we are starting with the rapid game from the first round, from the first day. It's the game Gukesh against Magnus Carlsen. So Magnus has a very important role in the selection of players. He basically said, I want to have the most attractive players participating in this event. So he invited Gukesh, but Gukesh is a really strong player. And he also said at the start, Gukesh, that he really likes to think from move 1. So this is actually the future of chess, so that we don't get these long theoretical battles. No, people have to start thinking from the very first move. So the players, they got to see this position only 10 minutes before the game. They could talk to other players to discuss strategies for this specific opening. But basically, this exact position is also new to them. So let's see how they approached this game. And let's see if we can learn some general strategies from their approach. Well, let's have a look. So Gukesh starts with white and he goes for the move f4. Well, that's not a move you would see in a normal starting position, but the idea is to open up the diagonal for this bishop. And even though it cannot do much, it's a typical strategy in general to try to get your bishops into the game as quickly as possible. Well, Magnus, being confronted with this move, replies here with the move c6. And now a very original position as black is threatening even to take the pawn on f4. White protects it with the move g3. And black now also play the move f5, trying to get the bishop involved. Well, now a few more moves. Of course, knight f3, the knight comes into play. And Magnus says, well, I want to clarify the situation. I'm playing here the move bishop b6. So the bishops are in touch with each other. And after, let's say, bishop takes, you can take with the pawn. And okay, the rook is doing well on this half-open file. So now, instead of taking on b6, white played here the move c3. Now it's black who decided to take on g1. Rook takes g1. And Magnus brings the knight to d6. He also got to defend that pawn on f5 as white was threatening to take the pawn with the queen. So white goes for the move d3, and now Magnus goes for interesting idea with the move b5. So grabbing space on the queen side, maybe the queen would like to join play very soon. Well, first it's white who opens up the center with the move e4. Pawn takes e4, d takes e4. Now the queen comes to b6. And the queen is looking at the rook, even though the rook is still defended by the knight. No immediate threats, but you gotta be careful. And look at Magnus's idea. After the move knight 1 to d2, he played here the move g5. That's a very cool idea, as he wants to put pressure on that knight on f3. You cannot take with the knight on g5 because of queen takes g1 and you're winning the rook as black. So the big question is, what has Magnus in mind after pawn takes g5? Well, then he just continues with the move knight e6. It's a pawn sacrifice. Okay, he's now intending to take on g5 and deflect the knight from f3 so that the queen hits the rook on g1. Rook e1 is played, so white is a pawn up, but black is very fast now getting all its pieces into the game. Bishop f7, bishop to b3, and now this is why this freestyle chess or chess 960, Fischer Random, however you would like to call it, this is the reason why it's so exciting, because we have an unusual position. Pieces are not going to their standard squares. And of course, there is the possibility to castle. You can just castle like in a normal game, but of course the king has to take a longer road. Now, black played a very surprising move, castling kingside. So the king goes totally to the other side of the board, and that is something probably white had even forgotten about, that it's possible. Of course, white has already moved its king's rook, so you can't castle kingside as white. But if the queen goes away, and that's what's going to happen very soon, queen c2 played. Black went here for the move a5. Now also white still has the option to castle queenside just by keeping the king on c1 and just get the rook over next to it. So that's a possibility, but it was not played. Instead, Gukesh wants to go for some action right away, and he played here the move e5 to attack the knight on d6. And obviously the knight doesn't have that many great squares to go to, but here black starts with the move bishop g6, attacking the queen on c2. Bishop takes e6 with check. Black takes back, so the queen on c2, it's still under threat. The queen goes to b3, and now the knight and the pawn, they are still under threat, but the knight goes away to b7. Queen takes e6. Look at this position, guys. Black is 2 pawns down, but it's far from clear. Rook f7, the check has been solved, and now we see that white is actually having a big problem, because this knight is on its way to c5 to attack the queen and then jump into d3 with a huge knight fork hitting the king and the rook on e1. If you try to cover that c5 square with a move like b4, then black is just going to take it, get the rook into to white's position with a move like rook a3. This is not going to be fun. So white was not interested in playing that. Instead went here for the move knight d4, but now knight c5 as announced, attacking the queen. White says, okay, at least I'm going to take a pawn. I hit your queen, I hit the rook on a8, but there's knight d3 check, and black is going to win back material. King to d1. Of course, you may now just go for the exchange of queens and then take on e1, but this position, it's far from clear, as white is having 3 pawns and a knight for the rook. So that's, materially speaking, absolutely fine for white. Instead, therefore, Magnus as black decided to take the pawn on b2 first, hitting the king. It's check. The king went to e2, and now very important moment, because this king on e2, it's not safe at all, and playing against a vulnerable king, yeah, you just got to apply the standard attacking rules you also do in normal game of standard chess. Just keep queens on the board, and I think with a move like queen d8, you're able to maintain a lot of pressure with ideas like bishop d3. It's very dangerous for white, and of course, this is not over yet. Anything can happen. But Magnus, strangely enough, decided to go for the exchange of queens. Queen takes c6, knight takes c6, and now he played rook c8 to attack the knight on c6. And here, rather than moving the knight away, Gukesh, fighting for the initiative, played the move e6, attacking the rook on f7, and the rook has to be careful. If it just goes away, there are ideas to take on e7 with a knight fork hitting the king and the rook on c8. So, well, bishop h5 check, first played, king to e3, solving the check, and now the rook goes to g7 to keep the pawn defended. The knight goes to e5, and what is going on here? Well, black could have taken the pawn on c3, but after a move like king d4, white is in control. It hits the rook on c3. After the rook goes away, you can put your knight on e4. White's pieces, they're looking wonderful on beautiful squares. So this was not played. Instead of taking on c3, black played here the move rook takes g5, attacking the knight on e5. So now the knight is under threat. White got to do something about it and played here the move king to d4. Wonderful idea to protect the knight on e5. Rook d8 check was played, and there are some issues with the knight on d2, so you can't just move the king away. Instead, knight d7 was played, blocking the check, and now Magnus is not doing badly here at all. There are a lot of interesting ideas, but he decided to play here the move bishop g4 with the idea to try to get rid of the pawn on e6, after which the knight on d7 is no longer protected. But here Gukesh played another excellent move. Played here the move rook e5, offering the exchange of rooks. After rook takes e5, king takes e5, the pawn on e6 is nicely defended, and there are no problems here at all for white. White is very active. So instead of taking on e5, rook g6 was played to hit the pawn on e6, but now it's rook d5, another classy move by Gukesh, with the point that the pawn on e6 cannot be taken here because of knight f6 check. And if you take the knight, then you pick up the rook thanks to this discovered check. So nice way of indirectly defending that pawn on e6. King g7 played, and here it's knight to e5. The knight comes back, it hits the rook on g6, also the bishop on g4. First rooks are getting exchanged, and well, here black got to decide how to deal with his rook on g6 and the bishop on g4. Well, you may take even with the rook on e6, with the point that if you take the bishop, there is rook d6 with a skewer after king c5, rook takes d2. Well, white is probably still a bit better here, but most likely this is going to end in a draw. Instead, Magnus played bishop takes e6 with check, and now Gukesh played another fantastic idea because he has to move the king, but he moves the king to d4, and this is very nice because I think most people would have thought that, okay, the king will go to c5 to hit the pawn on b5, but the reason the king goes to d4 is that after, well, the rook has to move now. Rook h6, white goes rook b1, hits the knight on b2, the knight goes to a4, and now this move doesn't come with check. If the king had been on c5, knight a4 would have been a very annoying check. Now you can simply take the pawn on b5, and white is in good shape. Well, the pawns on a2 and h2 can be taken, but not simultaneously. Black needs to decide which pawn to take first. Well, if you take on h2, then the knight can even come back. It hits the rook on h2, and after that you take the pawn on a5, and white is still pressing in this endgame. However, Magnus played here the move bishop takes a2, taking a pawn, but you have to be very precise. You would like to take on a5, but that runs into the move rook d6 check. And if the king goes away, then you can take on c3, the knight has been saved, and it also protects the bishop on a2. So instead of taking on a5, Gukesh just starts running with the pawn to c4. Excellent idea. So you're planning to, well, first of all, to save the pawn, but later on, this pawn is the most dangerous pawn on the board, can easily become a queen. Rook takes h2 played in the game, and knight df3 was played. Apparently going back with the other knight is also very sensible move, but knight df3 looks like the most active continuation. Now Magnus felt like, okay, I need to do something about that pawn. Let's try to come back, even though counter-attacking ideas are also interesting. Rook h6 played, rook takes a5 with a lot of pressure against these pieces on the a file. Rook d6 check played, so the king got to move, and then the knight comes to c3 to protect the bishop on a2. But after rook a3, these pieces are all of a sudden quite in trouble. You cannot protect the knight. The knight has to go away to d1. It's a check, so the king goes now to e2, and black still has the option to move the bishop away to b1, but things are not looking great. Look at that knight on d1, it's stranded at the side of the board. White pushes the pawn to c5 here, hitting the rook on d6, rook d5, and the pawn goes to c6. Black thinks, let's go back with the bishop, trying to stop the pawn, but here it's the move c7. Even though black is still controlling the promotion square with the bishop, the problem is that the rook also got to keep the knight defended. Well, therefore the knight went away to b2, but after rook a2, this knight is in trouble. And look, if the knight goes to d3, which was not played in the game, there's a beautiful trick, as with the move c8 queen, white is deflecting the bishop from its defensive duty. It has to take the queen on c8, and then his knight takes d3, and white is just a piece up in that endgame. So black's knight is trapped at the side of the board. It went back to d1, but now it's another fantastic idea. Look at this, guys. Rook c2. The rook gets behind the passed pawn. It's threatening to push the pawn to c8. It can count on the support of the rook. Of course, bishop takes c2, runs into c8 queen. So you cannot once again use that bishop on two different diagonals. Black decided to block that pawn with bishop c8, but now the knight comes back to d3 to interfere. The knight is unprotected. Black played king f6, and still you cannot take the knight on d1. It runs into rook takes d3. But now there are other ways of playing, because this knight is just trapped. Rook c1 was played, hitting the knight. And black tried this move, e5. Tricky idea, because if you take the knight now, there is e4. With a double attack, black is regaining the piece. That is something which has to be avoided. But instead, knight f takes e5 was played, with the idea that now after knight b2, you're trying to deflect the knight from d3. If knight takes b2, black is just going to take the knight on e5 with check. That's not good. But look at this. This is fantastic. It's like an endgame study. White has only one very precise way to win the game, and he can do it by means of the move rook f1, check. And where should you go with the king? Well, in the game, king e7 was played, but let me show you this. If you go king e6, it's even knight f4 with another knight fork. King takes e5, knight takes d5, king takes d5, rook f8. You're attacking the bishop. After the bishop goes away, you promote the pawn. It leads to an endgame with a rook versus a knight, but because the pawns are still on the board, the win is quite simple here for white. Well, instead of king e6, black Magnus played here the move king e7, but now, once again, you would like to take the knight, but the knight on e5 is hanging. Therefore, first, move the knight to c6. This is a very good idea, so that if you just move away the king, then it's knight takes b2. The king got to attack the knight on c6. King d6 was played in the game. Let me show you first. King d7 is met by rook f7 with check. Beautiful idea. King takes knight, and then again it's another knight fork into the other direction. King c5, knight takes d5, king takes, and there is rook f8. You're winning well, this bishop, or at least you're promoting the pawn, leading to that same endgame of rook versus knight. So that's just winning for white. Instead, there followed king d6, but now it is time for a rook f6 with check. You can take the pawn on c7. One problem is solved, but now it's time to take the knight on b2. This rook defends the knight. Black tried here to move bishop b7. And here the best move, the only square for the knight available. Don't go to e7. It runs into rook e5 with a double attack. But knight b4 is a safe move. You're attacking the rook. Rook went to h5. Now white is just a piece up and can easily converted by playing for a mating attack with these knights and the rook. Rook h3, black is trying to get rid of the pawn, but after rook f7, the knights are taking away the squares from the king on the 6th rank, forcing the king to go back to b8, knight d6, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to h1, and now it's knight a6. Look at this, the knights are hitting the king, king a8, and here knight b5 is the final move of the game. There's no time to take the pawn because of rook a7 with a beautiful mating pattern of two knights and a rook. If you instead try to solve this mating threat with the move bishop b7, cutting off the 7th rank, it runs into rook f8. The knight on b5 prevents the king from going to a7. Black has to play here the move bishop c8, but then you also win the bishop, and the game is just completely winning for white. And just incredibly exciting game. at the first day of this freestyle chess. And not surprisingly, people, even the strongest players, they are thinking this is the future of chess. There are so many exciting tactical ideas, no opening theory. People have to think from the very first move. Very exciting new type of chess. And let me know in the comments what do you think of this game. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date. Follow all the new videos I'm going to make in the coming days about this exciting event. So let me know all your thoughts and we see each other very soon again. All the best. Bye bye.